and 101, where all the good science stuff is happening. And if you could please give a wonderful round of applause to our speakers that are happening today. Yes! So Stephanie Jarvis comes from to us from Northern California and has a wonderful truffle dog named Jazzy. And she's going to talk about a really cool topic that is something that everyone wants to know about, because truffles are cool and delicious and wonderful, right?
Yes.
Woo! Without further ado.
Yes. I think Steve's gonna say something. Yeah.
No, you pretty well covered it. I don't know.
Steve's the boss. Steve's also the boss.
He's the king.
I just want to say that we were fortunate to hire Stephanie. How long have you been working with us?
1 year.
1 year. She's now on our team
today.
at Old Mushroom Superfoods in Vista.
Yeah.
She does works in the mycology department, doing strain development, looking at substrate formulations, doing all sorts of really cool sciencey stuff. And she was a great addition to the team, and we've got a great team. And she's kind of a renaissance woman, I would say. She's been in the wine world, in the truffle world, now in the functional mushroom world. So she's a clever lady.
Oh, thank
And
you.
I'm a mushroom nerd, quite willing to play the fool, as you can see. So enjoy her talk. Take care.
Yes!
Thanks, everybody. So, we're going to do a little, let me move this chair, little truffle tasting afterwards. I've got some chips. I have some truffle-infused oil, some truffle tapenade. We have some truffle cheese. And we also have some fake truffle oil, so you guys can taste the difference. And then I also have, to show you what we do for training of the truffle dogs, and some freeze-dried tuber borky. If you guys want to sniff this, we'll do this afterwards. But, ooh, that's some stinky truffle. Ooh, the truffles are stinky. So, I was looking back at some presentations, and so in my master's degree, I studied puffballs. And I got into truffles because I'm also an arborist, and some folks I know through the Napa wine industry world said, hey, can you come and see what's wrong with these trees? So that just led one thing to another, and now I have a company and I consult. Most of the work I do is on the phone or in the lab in 5 states, helping people grow truffles successfully. And go ahead and hit the button. So we have an hour, and I will go fast, and I want to hold questions until the end unless there's something that's just burning you need to know immediately. Do my best to answer your questions. But we're going to go through the history of truffles very, very briefly. I'll spend like half a second on it, and then we'll go into the egos involved in the industry. We'll talk a little bit about ecology, and then cultivation. We have a few folks in the audience today that are interested in farming and farming techniques. So I reworked my presentation to be more cultivating towards to those needs today. And at the very end, we'll talk about economics of the truffle world and why are they so secretive and expensive. And then we'll do a little truffle tasting. So the history of truffles goes back to prehistory. And the truffles, the interest in truffles have gone kind of up and down over the years. And in the Dark Ages, well, actually it goes back to like prehistory, but in the Roman Empire, there's a truffle in the desert in the Middle East called Trufflesia. It's kind of an almondy, nutty flavored truffle that still is interesting today to eat in the Middle East. In the Dark Ages, the clergymen thought that truffles, because it's like an aphrodisiac, it was like the fire of a woman, and it's the breed of the devil. So you like weren't allowed to have truffles. And then as you went into the Age of Enlightenment, if you didn't have truffles on your table and you were in the aristocracy, you were a poor aristocracy. So people would basically bankrupt themselves to have truffles on the table. And then as you go forward into time, into the 1900s, into the current era, there was a huge surge in truffle cultivation in Europe. And then in World War II, with the Industrial Revolution, unfortunately, a lot of men were sent to war and a lot of knowledge didn't get passed down. And in the Industrial Revolution, huge population of people moving off farmlands and going into cities to work at factories, and so there was a downturn in truffle cultivation then as well. More current day, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Madagascar, South Africa, a lot of countries are cultivating truffles. It's really not hard to take an oak or a hazelnut nut, germinate it, and get the truffle cultivar on the roots to grow these in a greenhouse and then bring them out into an orchard environment, and we'll talk about that. So mycorrhizae, is there anyone in this room that does not know what mycorrhizae are? Okay, so mycorrhizae means fungus root. There's a long history, and I could go on all day to talk about mycorrhizal relationships with plants. But basically, a tree root can only get so much surface area under the soil, and the fungi can then incorporate the rest of that soil surface area, and it shares nutrients and water to the tree, and the tree, making photosynthesis, will share sugars to the fungus. There's a lot of debate whether this is what type of relationship this is, if it's more benefit to the fungus or more benefit to the plant, or is it equal? It depends on where you went to school and who you talked to and what papers you've read or haven't read. But go ahead and hit the button. Today we're talking about the ectomycorrhizae. There's many different types of endo and ecto-endomycorrhizae, and they do different ways of getting into the plant tissue to share those nutrients. But here, the ectomycorrhizae, we're talking about the truffles. This is also your boletes, the Boletaceae, your Canthorellus, your chanterelles, some of the macrofungi we see out in nature that we like to eat. These are the ectomycorrhizae. Endomycorrhizae are the little guys that there are more abundant in tons of species, stuff that we discover regularly. But here, you're going to see pictures of this mantle, and we can see this with the naked eye. We call it little hot dogs on the roots. I'll point them out as we go through the slides. And this is an indication that we have the mycorrhizae on the trees. So what the mycorrhizae will do is they will stimulate the roots to make a lot of dichotomous branches so that there's more surface area, so there's more fungus, more root, more exchange. This is what it looks like under scanning electron microscopy. It basically looks like little socks that were knit on the tips of the roots. It's really cool. All right, so truffles. A little bit about truffles themselves. They lack the ability to forcibly discharge their spores, and they depend on animals and insects to disseminate their spores and for reproduction, for getting the spores out in nature. And they produce aromas, lots of different types of aromas. We have mostly the androstenals and then thiols. These are two different groups of aromas. And you have these musky compounds, the androstenals, that are pheromones. And truffles produce a pheromone that's very similar to female pigs in rut. And so they use traditionally male pigs to find the truffles underground. Now we use dogs. And then you have the thiols, which are more garlicky, more rotten eggs. And different species have different amounts of them. So they have different aromas like you would in different types of wine. So it's a very, very complicated system, and we also know now that there are other microorganisms involved in this system, and these different aromas will actually stimulate plant roots to elongate, plant root hairs to shorten so that there's more surface area for the fungi to exchange with the plant. So the fungi are basically in control underground through aromas, bringing in bacteria, nematodes, roots to make this whole ecosystem thrive. It's actually, the more we look, the smaller we look, the more we see and go, wow, we didn't think that was possible. Keep hitting that button. There we go. So that's a little bit of science for you. So now we can just relax and talk about egos. There's a lot of egos in this industry. So we have people from Oregon, Idaho, Spain, and Turkey, and Washington in this picture. And this is at a North American Truffle Growers Association meeting in Santa Barbara a couple of years ago. This is Kjeldsen Wineries producing Tuber melanosporum oak orchard in the background. And a lot of us truffle growers don't want contaminants in the soil, so we all wear these cool booties. It's a fashion statement. So this is the North American Truffle Growers Association. We highly encourage people who are interested in growing truffles to join this organization. We are totally transparent. There's a lot of research. There's professors involved. There's all kinds of research going on, and we share information. Growing truffles is not some kind of secret cult you have to join or sacrifice to get into. It's actually just farming. But there's a lot of other egos involved. I mean, there's mafia from Italy, from Spain, from France. There's competition with Australia. So how people do these inoculations, they like to keep it really secret, as if it's really just temperature, but simple. And then we have these other egos involved. Hit the button. We got the dogs, and we have the rattlesnakes. You can hit the button. And then we have this little ego right here, laying down, who needs a haircut. This is in the Turley Truffle Orchard in Paso Robles. It's a 20-year-old orchard. It's never produced a truffle. And I'll give you guys one guess why. They don't water. You don't use water. You grow trees. Cool, you got a forest. And you got habitat for organisms, birds to thrive. So that's great. But you just spent how much money to produce truffles, and now you have a forest. So that's great. It's good for your property value. So let's talk a little bit about ecology. We'll go back into science. So trees, truffles, and beasts. This is how forests function. So forests are a study in complex systems, and you need the soil, which is another complex system, the physical, the chemical, and the organic, and then you have all the organisms, and animals and insects can either like to eat the truffles, they prefer to eat the truffles, they might accidentally eat the truffles or other fungi, or all of the above. And Dr. Jim Trappe from the University of Oregon was a huge asset, and still is. And there's actually, his book is on sale at the Myco Society table, if you guys want to get a little truffle handbook when you go out foraging in the forest. So this is how we think or thought this system occurs, how truffles are produced in the soil. So basically you have a truffle. Where did it come from? I don't know. Was it the chicken or was it the egg? Somehow a truffle got there. And this little guy nibbled on it, brought it out of the ground, ate some of it, pooped it out, left a nice little nitrogen-rich package, and those truffle spores germinated, and then they grow their hyphal strands, and there's different mating types, and we'll talk about that later. It's like male and female, you could think of it that way, and then that will grow as free-living hyphae in the soil, through the aromas, they will find the roots, or the roots will find them. It's like magic. And then they will grow more hyphae, and then eventually they grow a little truffle, and then the truffle grows, all while making aromas, and then the rodent finds it, and again, there goes the system. But there really isn't that great of research out there that really ties this all together with the bacteria and other microorganisms in the soil. But one thing we do know is you do not want this guy in your orchard. You got to trap him. Baby, hit the button. So these egos do this to your trees, so you got to get rid of the rodents. Unfortunately, they're cute, and we're going to hit the button again. I hate to say it, but this is my favorite view of gophers. And this is your best tool, honestly. It's better than poison. It's better than carbon monoxide gas. You just have to be on top of it all the time with constantly using these. You put actually a wire on them or a chain. You don't want to use rope because they'll chew the rope off. And you put this down in the hole, and you usually use 3 or 4 holes because you have to dig it up, find where those runs are. You want 1 trap per run. They each need to be on a long wire because they will run in the hole with that attached to them as they're trying to escape. Then you can pull them out, and yeah. But these little guys actually are also your helpers in the forest if you're out in nature hunting for truffles. So if you want to hit the button one more time, the squirrels will actually cache truffles like this, and they make these heaps. And when you're like up in the Sierra Nevada, you can find this, and you can go in there, and you'll actually just be like, oh, a nice horde of truffles. Score. But sorry, little guy, you're going to starve for the winter. I know, we're cruel mycologists. These are more egos that we don't like to see in orchards. Now, the roly-poly is cute, and the roly-poly doesn't do much, but if they're in high concentration, particularly in Australia, they're a problem. They will eat your truffle. They'll eat the primordia truffle and keep your truffle from making large fruiting bodies that we need for our return on investment for building this orchard. The slugs will also eat the primordia, and they will also chew on your truffle. And then the Laodes beetle is actually from Europe, and we currently don't have it here in the US that we know of yet so far, but it has shown up in orchards in Australia, and it's not native to Australia. So it probably got shipped there from Europe on inoculum, and the eggs were still viable, didn't have a kill step in the lyophilization where you ground, powder, pulverize your truffle for using inoculum. Somehow the Laodes beetle ended up. If you hit the button one more time, we'll hear Marcos Mercier. He's an amazing guy and a truffle grower in Spain. Oh, let's turn the volume up. Well, he's talking about the Laodes beetle and the truffle. So they burrow into the ground, and then they burrow into the truffle, and then they can ruin the grade of the truffle. There's a grading system from a perfect truffle with no nicks or bruises or rot or bug holes to then levels of acceptability of having these things in your truffle, which reduces the cost of them significantly. But in the opposite is also cool because the Laodes beetle will go in, they eat the truffle, and then they will disseminate the spores and help also move your mating types around your orchard system or in the wild as well. So they're good, but they're bad in terms of crop acceptability. So let's talk about truffle orchards. What is a truffle orchard? It's an orchard of trees, but we are growing fungi on the roots in the ground. And we're actually growing a crop that we can't see with our eyes. So we have to do a lot of scientific, rigorous testing to make sure that our system is set, and also we don't use insecticides, a lot of fertilizers, or all the isides, the fungicides, insecticides, herbicides. We want to keep it organic, and I highly recommend organic, biodynamic, and electroculture farming practices. So why would you want to plant trees? Well, as an arborist, planting trees on your property always increases your property value. First of all, it invites birds and other organisms into your property, and it creates a nice system. They're also nice to look at. They provide shade. So trees provide so much. So I highly encourage, even if you're not going to put in a truffle orchard, put in food forests for your future generations to feed your local community. Root grafting also provides structural stability, and structural stability of not just the trees, but also the soil. And trees will graft to not just their species, but to other trees in the area, and they share nutrients, and they share information as well. So land considerations. So when you're thinking, I want to grow truffles, well, okay, well, that's a loaded question. Like, how do we grow truffles? You have to look at the land. You have to look at how you're going to mow it, how you're going to till it, how you're going to manage it, how you're going to prune it. These are a lot of things to consider. Here, we're actually in zones 10A, 10B, and 11A in San Diego. But up in Julian, I'm sure most of you are familiar, it does snow. It's higher elevation. They have natural oak stands in the area. It's a really good prime habitat. Very high pH, granite-rich soils. So you could definitely grow truffles here in Southern California, and I know a couple of people who have gone down that rabbit hole. Now, if you don't have a lot of rainfall, you definitely need a lot of irrigation. So water is your biggest asset. So I know truffle orchards that actually truck in water when they don't have enough water in August and September. This is mostly Northern California, where they're also having to share it with grapes, and they're also watering crops because they're going into the grape harvest time. But in France, they say a summer without rain is a winter without truffles. But they say it in French. So there's some trees to consider. We have English oak, hazelnut, and stone pine, and holm oak and holly oak. So the English oak grows tuber melanosporum, which is your black paragourd truffle, tuber aestivum, which is your summer truffle, which we have both of those here to taste, and then tuber borchii, which is my favorite truffle. This has more of those thiols. It has that garlicky, floral essence. It's more of a female. It's more like it's akin to the alba truffle, tuber magnatum from northern Italy. That is so expensive. But we can grow this here, and I'll tell you why in a bit. But now hit the button. So hazelnuts also grow all three. And then stone pine, if you hit the button one more time, grows tuber borchii. So if you want to grow multiple types of truffle on multiple types of tree, you can do that. If you want to grow only one type of truffle, you can still do that on multiple types of trees, which makes a nice system for an orchard. It looks beautiful. And then we also have linden trees. You hit the button one more time. So this is a big, beautiful canopy shade tree. This tree is probably over 100 years old. But there is a gentleman up in Washington. He's starting to work with linden trees. In Turkey, they grow truffles, black tuber melanosporum, on linden trees. And they grow up to be a very nice tree. So there are other options. These are the players that we're playing with. So we grow tuber borchii. Tuber magnatum is the white truffle from northern Italy. We haven't figured out its quirks yet. It needs multiple species of bacteria in the soil, specific species of bacteria, for it to fruit. So there's more of a complex system there that we haven't quite figured out. Now, in northern Italy, you will find orchards with tuber magnatum, but just remember, native tree, native soil, native rodents, bringing them in and out of your system, and then also native truffle in that regard. Can you go back one for me, sec? And then tuber melanosporum, this is our black paragourd truffle. Tuber aestivum, again, our summer truffle. And then tuber brumale is another nice truffle. It has some lesser aroma as tuber melanosporum. And then we have tuber indicum. This is a truffle that grows all over China, and it has almost no aroma that our noses detect. The dogs can smell them. I've eaten all of these truffles, and I actually like tuber indicum. It's not too musky. It's not too like jock straps and dirty socks that you find in a locker that these guys tend to taste like. That's why I like white truffles, but some people like Cab, some people like Pinot Noir, and I'm, you know. Anyhow, so this is actually, we consider this a contaminant. Tuber indicum is a problem in orchards, and when California first started growing truffles, it was found on some inoculated trees that were grown up in the Ukiah area, and that's why we now wear those booties in orchards, because nobody knows where your shoes have been. We don't want to contaminate with the wrong type of truffle. In my mind, looking at growers here in the United States, if you grow tuber indicum, you're still growing a truffle. So, good job, right? So in Europe, they have orchards that produce tons, like 20, 60, 100 tons per year. We are in grams. Like, oh, I got a 10-gram truffle this year. And then New York Times comes out and takes pictures of you, right? So we're still in the very, like, in baby stages. Also, I added another slide last night, pecan truffles. So pecan truffles have been known here in the United States as a thing for quite some time, but the marketability of this truffle has taken off because of partly to this whole mushroom craze. People want to eat more truffle. People want to grow more truffle. People want to eat mushrooms. People want to wear mushroom costumes and have costume parties. We just had one outside. So now people, and pecans are also delicious. Who doesn't like a pecan pie? So they naturally will grow in the southeast of the United States, tuber leonii, on the pecan tree. And so now actually Maker's Mark in Kentucky just put in 20 acres of pecan with tuber leonii specifically for growing the truffle. And well, they'll get pecans too, so that's a benefit. Most of the truffle orchards that I work with grow these guys. These are contaminants, but they say that if you're growing these other false truffles, you also have other truffles fruiting in your orchard. And it's true, like the Colesta vineyard we saw earlier in the slideshow, I've seen rhizopogon growing all over the field there, and also pulling tuber melanosporum out the same day. So they like the same type of environmental conditions and cues to fruit, which is great. So, but if you think of a tree and you think of the roots you can think of like a neighborhood, and all of the spaces to live are inhabited, and you want those houses on the roots to be the truffle you're trying to grow and not these guys. But if they like complex systems, then are these guys a contaminant? That's for you guys to decide if you guys plant truffles. So I'm not one to say that these are bad or good, because it sounds like it's all what you need to be successful. But you can't eat these, so yeah. So building new orchards. I love this toy. I didn't get to drive it because I'm not a D8 licensed tractor driver. But you do want to, you buy a piece of land and you dig a giant hole because you want to see all of your soil horizons. You want to get down to the parent soil. You want to know what its minerality is, what its makeup is, because whatever's down there, your surface soil is going to eventually be that. You don't just buy land, buy trees, plant them in the ground, and hope for truffles a year later. That's not how this works. You get a tractor, you dig a giant hole, you sample all your soil levels, and then you figure out, what do I need? Do I need gravel? This is rice hulls with potash for biochar. You want to add gravel because maybe you have too much clay. You need to break up that clay. You need to bring in sand. You want it silty, nice silty, soft soil. Now, in Spain, it looks like rock, that they're growing in rock. This is the Teruel area of eastern Spain, south of Barcelona, which is the truffle capital of Europe. You think it's Italy, but it's actually in Teruel where they're cultivating. And I'll show you pictures in a bit. But it's all limestone, so it's very high pH soil. Now, you need high pH soil because the native species of fungi that grow here in the US like lower pHs in the 6.5, 6 range. These truffles are native to high pH granite soils, so when you add this limestone, you add oyster shell, you add flour grade and gravel grade limestone to your soils to raise your pH, you actually are going to outcompete the native species that you don't want taking up the community on your tree roots, and you'll be encouraging these other truffle species to grow more than the natives. So how do you grow truffle? Basically, in Europe, they do it like it's no big deal. They harvest the nuts from their trees, they clean them, they take them through a cooling and warming, like the winterizing, like you would with other plant species, and then they plant them, and then they let them grow, and they let them grow for a couple of years, and then they plant them out in the orchard. And they do this by the thousands. Heated trays and vermiculite and perlite baths with temperature control are your friend to getting the nuts on your trees. These are all oaks to germinate, and then also with the DNA tested truffle fruiting bodies that you would then buy from like Marcos or another producer. Want to hit the button, babe? You grow oceans of them in greenhouses. Or you can buy from a nursery like New World, Truffier in Oregon. There's another gentleman who I'm not remembering at this moment who just came online this last year up in Washington. And this is in Australia, you go big or you go home. Or you just grow one tree. You don't have to grow 50,000 acres of truffle. You could plant one tree at home and try to grow truffles. I don't see anything wrong with that. The backyard truffle grower is a thing. Jasper came from a truffle orchard in Sacramento. Her orchard is incorporated with tomatoes, cucumbers, apples, lots of citrus, koi pond, rose garden. It's a beautiful system. It's in you can't mow it. It's impossible to mow, but so she has to pull her hand weeds. But you can make a really beautiful garden setting and throw in truffle trees. Inoculum. So one of the master theses that came out of Dr. Trappy's lab up at the University of Oregon came up with this awesome cocktail of truffle sauce. And they went through this whole rabbit hole once upon a time, making liquid inoculum with truffle sauce and inoculating trees. And you don't need to go through all of this. You just need to freeze dry your truffles, grind them into a powder, and make a nice liquid inoculum, and then you slurry the trees. You don't have to use soils. You can use perlite, vermiculite, what you have on hand. You want sterility. You don't want contaminants in your lab or in your greenhouse. So if you're growing two different species of truffle, you want to keep them separate in two different greenhouses. In fact, Marcos Morcillo in Spain, they have 3 greenhouse setups, and they're miles apart from each other because they don't want them to contaminate. If I'm going to sell you a tree with tuber melanosporum, I don't want you to find that it has tuber borkii on it or indicum. So you got to keep it clean. Basically, you can make a milkshake. You can blend it in your Frappuccino maker at home. You don't have to be fancy about it. You dip your roots You grow your roots. It's not hard. You will get failure and you will get success. It's just like anything you do. You plant how many tomato seeds and then you pick the strongest ones to put in your garden. It's the same setup. That's why you want to grow a lot of them at once and then pick the strongest ones to survive. And here we go. Perlite. Perlite. Yes, little tiny lava rock. Lots of air pockets for the mycorrhizae to germinate and grow into. Here are the little hot dogs. Does anybody not see these little hot dogs on the tips? This is a mycorrhized root. And you want to grow them in an ocean. And then you can buy them just like this. They'll ship them to your house. Keep going. Okay, so pruning, tilling, and mowing. So we did all this great sciencey stuff. You got this project going on in your garage, and you're like, okay, I'm making truffle trees. This is the majority of the stuff. It's hard work. Constant mowing, keeping the weeds down, keeping a little bit of tillage, which actually does like you want 2 to 3 inches of tillage even in the season of truffle, because you root prune and you drive the truffle to be just below the subsurface of the soil so that you don't have truffles breaching, because then the bugs find them and the slugs find them easier. And if you get snow or frost, which is not a problem here, but it would be a problem in Julian or a problem in Oregon, Washington, Idaho. So you do a little bit of root tilling, and that drives the truffle production to be below the soil, which then helps keep the temperature more even throughout the year.
You really want to keep your hazelnuts, if you grow hazelnuts, shoulder, head height. You want some shade, don't want too much shade. Tubermelanosporum, they say in Europe grows in the sun, but what we're seeing here, particularly in California, is we're seeing it fruiting in the shade. Well, it's hot here. We don't have all this beautiful rain in the summertime like they do off the Mediterranean coast. So here we need to irrigate, and we're finding them fruiting in the shade. So you just take a look at your orchard, your row orientation, where your sun sets, where your winds normally come through, and this is going to help you design your orchard so you can funnel the air the way you need to through your orchard so it's not too harsh, and you have the canopy. This is in the winter because these are deciduous trees, but you do want some shade to also keep the solar radiation off of your soil. So it's actually nice to have a little moss. If you have enough rain and moisture, some moss will grow, and the irrigation will also grow lots of grass. So I'll talk about that in a second. If you grow hazelnuts, this is what you have to contend with after 15 years. It's constant pruning. This is actually me making a highway to get to irrigation so I can walk through the orchard. And it's just a lot of mowing and pruning. Using oaks or the stone pine, it's less maintenance overall. That's why in Australia it's pretty much 100%, 98% all oak trees. Here we have netafin. And this is broadcast spraying. If you broadcast spray with irrigation, you're just growing weeds, and it's wasteful of water for the most part. So if you use a netafin, which is an inline sprinkler, it's a self-clearing line, you can precisely irrigate right where you have the drip zone of your canopy and where you're going to put in your re-inoculation efforts, which we're going to talk about in a second. Irrigation, different style. This is an old apple orchard style where it's like a rain system over the top. You can get these giant irrigators that'll do 1 acre at a time. And these little plastic things, these little twirly-magoos, they break all the time. And then risers like this, if you hit the next button, often end up like this when you mow. So you gotta be careful where you put your risers, how you do your irrigation, so you don't destroy it. And then we have electroculture.
This is a fun way to garden and a fun way to bring the natural ionosphere into your garden. It's an ancient, it goes back a couple hundred years. It's used actually quite a bit in France for vegetable gardening and for germinating seeds. I'll go back. Oh. Yeah. So I used, these are the Laoski coils where the opening points to due north, and it was one row of trees, and I wanted to see if it was going to grow faster or bigger leaves or something than the rest of the orchard. And sure enough, this row of trees was taller and fuller and greener by the end of the growing season. So electroculture, I feel, actually works, and you can make some really cool designs with different metals in your orchard to make some really cool antennas, and looks artsy, and it's fun. Definitely fun. So another thing you need to take into account is sexual compatibility in your orchard. What we see is after a period of time, these are pots, this is a study, pots in a greenhouse, after a period of time, you get the males and then you get the females, and they're not together. And we also see that in orchards that you may not have any truffle on one tree, you may have one mating type on one tree, and then you've got a bunch of different things going on another tree, and that's where you're going to find the truffle. If you don't have the males and the females, you won't get your fruiting bodies. So re-inoculating your truffle orchard is important, particularly where you're trying to grow a non-native species here in California. Old school thought was we planted and we prayed. Now we need to look at the roots, do DNA analysis on your roots, and check for mating type compatibility, which is actually time consuming and expensive. So a lot of people haven't really got into testing their orchards for mating types yet, but as it gets cheaper and easier to do, then there's more of that we're going to see. But what we see is that the males are short-lived mycorrhizae, free-living hyphae in the soil, and the females connect more to the roots of the trees, and you need both of them to make a happy truffle. So it's a dynamic system that you really have to pay attention to. You can't just plant and pray and spray water on it. This is how we do root analysis. When you first grab trees, you definitely want to get familiar with using a microscope, looking at things in tiny detail, and you always want to sacrifice a couple trees so you can look at the roots to make sure that you didn't just buy a bunk batch of trees. Running DNA tests on random sampled trees in your orchard once a year is highly recommended. And you can always take a map. I always recommend my clients make a map of their orchard, and then you always GPS coordinate any truffles you get, and then also map out which trees you test every year. And you can, randomly sample once a year and change that up. Re-inoculation efforts are not fun. It's hard work. It's the worst part of truffle cultivation. So when I first started, we started with little drills. And then we went to a big drill. And then we went to a tractor. And there are really cool tractor implements they make in Europe. There's a company out of France. And basically it has a plow. And on the back is your inoculum. And it puts in peat moss, sterile peat moss, rips the hole, dumps the peat moss, inoculates. And there's another little guy that all on the tractor with pushing of the thumb that closes up the hole. But those cost about $150,000 to $200,000 just for that fancy tool. And Fabrice Cabral, Fabrice, he recently bought one, and so all the Northern California truffle guys are like, hey, can we borrow that? No, it's not leaving my orchard. And he actually got his first truffles this year, which is like major efforts. So becoming a truffle orchard aficionado, you get familiar with the tiny little details of the morphology of the different species of truffle. And this is the part that I just love. Each truffle has a fingerprint. And these are both contaminants, by the way. So I'm going to just pick on Tuber melanosporum for a second. It has very distinct spores. Go back. Very distinct spores. Some spores are globose, some are oblong, some look like they have soccer balls, some like this have spikes. Tuber melanosporum have spikes with a little curve on the end. Tuber melanosporum also has these very distinct 90-degree angles on the cystidia, which is a type of anti-herbivory cell that it grows because it doesn't want a nematode coming along and chewing on this root. It's doing truffles like, this is my business, get out. So these cystidia, we think, don't taste good, and they have 90-degree angles, just this species, whereas other species have different morphology. So if you are looking at a Tuber melanosporum tree root and you see the 90-degree angles, you go like, thumbs up. If you don't see your 90-degree angles, you see something else, you go, thumbs down. And you can always check with DNA. I typically do use ITS, very simple, quick and dirty DNA tests. So back to ecology. So reforesting is really important, particularly in Oregon and Washington and up in BC, Canada. Here is an example of reforesting an area. This is in Spain. In the 60s, the Spanish government saw this as a viable crop and started giving farmers land and trees with the caveat that you can never replant. If you're growing truffles, you know you have like a 20 to 50 year window that you're going to get a good quality, good quantity of truffles out of your land, and then you want to start successionally replanting your orchard. But in Spain, they were repopulating the landscape with trees because the aristocracy centuries prior cut all the trees down to build the Spanish Armada. So this was an effort to create more oak forests, and they're using Quercus ilex, which is a native tree in the area and grows Tuber melanosporum. And this is one of the reasons why the Teruel region in Aragon of Spain, the east coast of Spain, is the Tuber melanosporum capital. You may think you're getting truffles from from France or Italy, but a lot of these black truffle are actually coming out of the Teruel area of Spain. Now in Washington, if you can go back a slide, in Washington, this is an overgrown Christmas tree farm. So this turned into a natural black, Oregon black, Leucangium carthusianum, which is a lot to say. Leucangium carthusianum is the species of the Oregon black truffle. And just naturally, this overgrown Christmas tree farm turned into a truffle orchard. And my friend Mike, he bought it, and this is his doggy Aldo, another Lagotto. And it just grows truffles like it's, his house always smells so bad because it's always got so many truffles in it. Like, Mike, you need to clean. Oh, no, it's just truffle. So let's talk about economics. And then we'll taste some truffle. What do you guys think of that? Yeah, good. You guys doing okay? Am I going too fast? Perfect. I took a lot of notes, but that's okay. So, the most expensive truffle was from Croatia. It was almost 3 pounds and went on auction for $330,000. Could you imagine? I'm gonna just spend that amount of money on the truffle, and then you have to eat it very quickly. There's no ROI on this for that. It's just, this is another ego thing. Just let's buy a giant truffle for almost $500,000 and make some pasta. I mean, yeah. So you see the biggest producers, it's not us, this ego, but we have a lot of other countries that are doing truffle cultivation and doing it well. And it could take you about $10,000 to $35,000 to install. It depends on what infrastructure you already have. So do you already have a tractor? Do you already grow vineyards or another orchard like avocados here in this area? Do you have a water tank? Do you have to put in a well and a fence? Like, this number depends on how big you want to go and what you do or don't already have. Next slide, as we slide down to the end of the presentation. Okay, hit it again. There we go. So here's the white truffle. This is tuber magnatum from Italy. It's delicious. Everybody loves it. And because it has this garlic and these nice, beautiful floral characteristics. And it is so expensive. You hit the button, and it's beautiful. So it goes for about $2,600 a pound. This is not a cheap date. This is like caviar, champagne, and truffle evening with your Christian Louboutin shoes on, right? Hit the button. Tuber melanosporum, again with our 90-degree angles. And then there's also that sock I was talking about, also has its own style of how it looks under the microscope, which also is a key indication when you're looking at them in fine detail. Hit the button. Okay, I gotta fix that one. Hit it again and again. So many animations. $1,600 a pound. Tuber aestivum, this is the summer truffle. So you can grow the tuber melanosporum in the winter. It fruits around November, December, January, February. And an orchard up in Placerville, California Placerville, they have found tuber melanosporum in March. So here in the US, we're not quite sure what the season is quite yet, but tuber aestivum is grown in BC, Canada, because it fruits in the summer. This is the summer truffle, so we don't have to worry about finding it under snow. So this is another idea for you if you have a snowy area and you don't want to be out hunting truffles freezing in the snow or in the rain, which we often are. You can grow the summer truffle, and it's like a August, July, June fruiter. And it also, look at this cystidia, very different than the 90-degree angles. And look at those spores. They look more like a soccer ball orientation. And actually, under scanning electron microscopy, those ridges are actually like raised little walls on the edge of that exoperidium, on that ultraspore structure. It's really, really, really cool. And it's fetching price is right, $800 a pound. So you can see why people want to grow tuber melanosporum over tuber aestivum. And then my favorite, the bianchetto truffle, because it has this really nice garlicky and jasmine-y aromas. And look at this cystidia. These just long spikes, but there's not too many of them. So they're kind of sparse and sporadic, but clearly defined. And then it also has this puzzle-like sheathing sock on the root. But it's very similar to the tuber magnatum. And it goes for about $600 a pound. Now these are primo truffle without slug holes or rot or any of the like. These are like your perfect truffle. Now you have to be careful with truffle products, which is my lead in to tasting some truffle products. I've been to a couple truffle factories in Spain specifically, and there was a huge vat, and they're, tuber melanosporum, and I look in and I see truffle cut with a white gleba, black truffle with a white gleba. The gleba is the interior. To me, that says tuber indicum. To me, that says they bought a bunch of Chinese truffle and threw it into this tuber melanosporum vat because they were getting ready to close the lid to heat it up. And the guy's like, oh, nothing to see here, nothing to see. And he closes the lid. I'm like, I see you guys are cheating. And a lot of the tapenades are actually blended with black olive. So it's a black truffle with black olive. It's like a filler. And they charge you a ton of money for a truffle product, but it's a lot of black olive. The black olive has very similar aromatics to truffle. So they use this to thin out the truffles that they use. They make truffle juice, and they go through hundreds of thousands of tons of truffle a year. It's really crazy. And just be careful when you buy truffle products. If it doesn't have the species on it, I don't trust it, me particularly. But there's no truffle police out there, or mushroom police in general, that says your labeling is incorrect. But we're trying to do something about that, especially with the NATGA, the North American Truffle Growers Association. Stuff that's imported to the United States should have either a species on it, or it should say fake truffle or synthesized truffle aroma or something that can clue you off that, because some people do like fake truffle oil. So just be careful, because it can go from that. And they also use button mushrooms, Agaricus bisporus, and olive oil, and then they blend it to a tapenade. And we're going to try some tapenades today. We can decide amongst ourselves if it's black olive or not. Okay, so where do I fit in with all of this? Is it my ego or is it my economics? No, I'm a mycologist, and I love ecology, and I love food forests for the future. Something else that I find very important for me to be able to do to my community, to give back to my community in my little tiny person is carbon sequestration. I can plant trees, I can help improve people's property values, I can bring habitat for the birds and the bees, and grow some truffles. And play with electroculture experiments and have a little fun. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you, San Diego Mycological Society. I appreciate you guys' time. We've got a few minutes for questions. Yeah.
Your educational background. Okay, so there's not much in the way of mycological resources. Like, there's not a single mycology course offered in any of the biology departments, in any college, in all of San Diego County, not even one. So tell me about your background.
So once upon a time, a long time ago, I was 7, and my father is a marine biologist. We used to go camping, and he used to put me in snorkeling gear and dunk me in the ocean, and it was raining, and I was cold, and I was whining, and my dad was like, all right, tomorrow you're not coming out to the ocean. So I got taken into the forest, and that was the first time I went mushroom hunting. And I was also in this Star Wars world, because at 7, that's when Princess Leia was all the rage. And I got to go into Eldaron Forest and be an Ewok. And now I have an Ewok. She doesn't look like an Ewok. So that's when I got inspired to be interested in mycology. My undergrad, I actually went to Sonoma State University, and I studied plant physiology and organic chemistry. And at that time, Phytophthora ramorum, which is sudden oak death, hit California like a storm. Our university got a huge grant to study, and I was lucky to be on the genetics team and went and did a ton of field work, collecting samples, putting out transects, doing ecology work, and Phytophthora ramorum is a fungi. So that was my first intro into doing mycology work. And that was cool. And then life happened, and then I decided to go back to school and study mycology with Dr. Dennis Desjardin at the San Francisco State University. He's a world-renowned Mycena mycologist, little tiny mushrooms. And I studied puffballs. Why did I study puffballs? Well, because I really wanted to go to the tropics. He went to a lot of tropical places. So I goes, Dennis, I want to study this in here. And he goes, no, the puffballs of California need a lot of work. A week later, Dennis, okay, I had a new idea. I want to do this. No. The puffballs of California need a lot of work. Okay, so I became puff mama in my grad school years. And I was going to go to UC Berkeley to finish a PhD, but I needed to work, so that ship sailed, and now I am an OMI with the OM team. Yeah. So that's, and I actually, after graduate school, I started my own mushroom farm. I bought a 40-foot container. I spent money to trick it out with make a rainstorm, and I grew a lot of shiitakes for restaurants in Napa Valley where I'm from. And that was a huge endeavor. And you can't grow mushrooms by yourself and make a profit. You're just a hobbyist. And so I went back to the wine industry to sell wine to make money. Time goes on, the mushroom craze happens, and a very good friend of mine who works at M2 Ingredients called me up and said, Steph, we need you. And so it took some time, and now I live in San Diego. It's pretty awesome. Yeah, so that's my background. Yeah.
So you talked about like tree sensitivities for these species like hazelnut.
Yeah.
If you were growing for truffles, would the maintenance of the trees be different? I know you talked about keeping them at, like in other words, would you still grow nuts?
You can still grow nuts, yes. So to grow a nut crop on hazelnuts, you also need to fertilize with nitrogen. So if you actually have horses eat straw. Straw has an amount of lignin that they actually don't digest very well. So the poop, you leach out the poop and you use that as your fertilizer. Truffles love lignin-rich soils. So that's a good marriage right there. And hazelnuts, you will get a crop off your hazelnuts. Now what you see as the trees are young is your nuts will be hollow for several years, but if you boost your nitrogen level and keep your pH high, nitrogen's gonna try to fight you for that, to bring your pH down, but if you put in enough granite-rich limestone, and then also a manure style, you can use cow manure also, but it's a little bit different texture and nutrient-rich, but it can work, and you can make hazelnuts. And you'll get bumper crops some year where you're like, what am I gonna do with all these? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Julie?
First time I ever heard of fake truffles. Why can't you eat them? Are they poisonous? Do they not taste good?
Some are poisonous. They will give you really bad gastrointestinal upset. They won't kill you, but you'll have really, really horrible gut issues. We don't eat rhizopogon. There's, in my notes, there's about 65 species of tuber that we know of. And in Italy, there's about 9 or 10 that grow. And of those, 6 we consider culinarily interesting. And why? Because of the aroma and the taste profile. So there are fungi that are perfectly edible, but we don't necessarily eat them because they don't have the texture and the flavor and the aroma that we find delicious. Like reishi, for example, but it's really woody, so it's really hard to chew on. So yes, so there's lots of mushrooms, lots of other truffles that we can eat. It's just we don't find them culinary interesting. But there's also a truffle here in California, Tuber californicum. It's a delicious truffle. You can find it in your yard sometimes under your native oaks, but it's so tiny, if you try to shave it, you might shave some knuckle with it. And you have to find a lot of them to make it interesting. And you can put them in a jar with butter or with eggs, and the eggs and the butter, the fat there, will then absorb the aromas, and then you can use the cheese, the butter, the egg to then eat. And to do that, you don't want to keep them together for too many days, otherwise it's just too much, it's overwhelming, and it's disgusting. But a certain period of time, a short period of time, those truffles can still do you good by giving the flavors to your butter, eggs, cheese. Yeah?
3 questions. Are there any known health benefits, like with the other mushrooms that we were talking about earlier? Has anybody been able to cultivate truffles indoors? And third, if I have oaks on my property, is there a way to buy an inoculant and try and inoculate the oaks?
Okay, first question. They think it's a sexual aphrodisiac, and historically they used to boil the truffle and soak cloth in the truffle to cure cataracts for eyes. But this is like in ancient Greece. So I haven't really found any medicinal papers that show that this is anti-inflammatory or good for gut health or anything like that. We just like to eat them because they taste good. And then again, on your trees that you have in your yard, yes, you can buy inoculum, and yes, you can try it. I would encourage it. It doesn't mean you're ever going to get a truffle because the roots that you have already likely have native species growing on them. So if there's no house for them to move into, but each year you're going to get a new set of feeder roots that are going to come onto your trees. So if you were to go around and till in a big circle around a tree and then add, bring the pH up, sprinkle in some truffle inoculum, you might get a truffle. I mean, why not? It's fun. It could be a fun little project. But more likely, not so much. Now, up in the Pacific Northwest and in Canada, they take old rotting boletes or old rotting chanterelles and they shred them in a blender, make like a smoothie out of them, and they'll put them in their backyard under the trees that they like to grow under. And they say it works for growing, boosting their crop and their, if you live in the forest. So maybe? Indoor. There are some people who claim they have grown truffles indoors. If you have enough soil, like the arboretum here, probably. Why couldn't you? It's open air. It's beautiful. It's cool. Go inside if you haven't gone inside already. There is a gentleman in France who claims that he grew a truffle in a pot on his rooftop apartment in Paris. Did that really happen? Maybe. I don't know. But some people have tried in greenhouses, but again, these projects aren't published. They may somehow get into the news or into a magazine. That's how we find out about this guy in Paris on his rooftop and his planter. I do have a client in Northern California who grew truffle trees in his backyard in these big planter boxes. And then he recently transplanted them onto his property up in Lake County. They're in the ground now. And he's been re-inoculating them, and he got a truffle on it one year, but it was actually a rhizopogon, so I'm like, well, it's not really a truffle, but people are trying.
Are there theories why truffles can't be cultivated in like the same, substrates and indoors like rishis and turkey tails?
So that's a whole nother, like reishi and turkey tail, we at M2 are growing on oats, not a tree root. In the wild, turkey tail and reishi are parasitic on trees or lignin lovers. They're eating the tree itself and helping to kill the tree. It's a late life fungi that gets on the tree to help regenerate that tree back into the soil. That's a whole nother ecological system. Then mycorrhizae, which is growing on the roots, that's feeding the tree with nutrients and water that it shuttles to the tree that it finds in the ecosystem. It's a whole different type of lifestyle. Indoors, I'm sure people are trying it, and we do it in greenhouses, but those trees end up outside, so they have their larger space to thrive. Yeah. Yes.
I want to thank Stephanie, but I want to read a truffle poem that I wrote specifically for her.
Okay.
In the fields where earth meets the sky, a truffle farmer, a glint in her eye, with hands that nurture the soil so deep, she watches as her truffles sleep. A farmer of fungi, the hidden prize, she seeks the treasure where it lies. Her loyal friend, a dog named Jazzy, a truffle pup, always so snazzy. Together they roam through forest and glen, finding truffles again and again. At the fungus fair, she stands with pride, her truffles a secret she'll never hide. With each careful step she picks with care and spells the fungus with love to share. A life in the dirt, a life so true. Her heart, like the truffles, is rich and new. Through autumn and spring they work side by side. In the scent of the earth they take it in stride. A truffle farmer with Jazzy near, spreading her love year after year.
Aww. That's beautiful. Thank you. That's awesome.
She's so generous with her knowledge and she's infectious in every way, like in the best way. She shares her love of mushrooms and the Enneagram and life and fun and playfulness, and we're so happy to have her in San Diego. So,
Jay, you just missed the most amazing poem. Well, she'll share it. I'll read it to you again another time.
you can post it on your wall at work.
Yeah, fully. Absolutely. Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious. So when you're preparing your soil, you're creating a new substrate.
Yeah.
What's the depth of that? So you're going back how
Yeah, it depends on your pH. So if you have a low pH in the 6, you're going to add several tons of lime, and you're going to rip it in at least 2 to 3 feet. And you're going to do that 2 to 3 times a year for 3 to 5 years before you plant. You really want to get that pH stable. If you have to add gravel, it's usually to the top 6 to 12 inches. And biochar as well, if you're adding in the rice hulls or biochar or lava stone, that's usually to the top top surface. Yeah, because your feeder roots, your truffles are really only 3 to 6 inches under the ground. And that's the area, that's like the magic zone that you're really trying to keep. But the reason why you put the lime and you rip it in down deeper is because the parent soil is going to end up coming up anyways as soils do move around and as you till and mow. So you want to make sure that you have enough lime that you don't have to lime every year. Because it's not cheap, it's not expensive, but the shipping of it to get it to your property is expensive. It's the trucking fees to get it there is the problem. Yeah, yeah. Does anybody want to try some truffles? All right, let's try some truffles. Oh, just come on over. Okay. Yeah, here, let's open this. We can smell it.
This one's the fake one?
I think so. Does it have a species on it?
It does.
What does it say?
Well, it's first ingredient is olive oil, and then it's tuber melanospore.
Oh, then there's truffle in there.
Yeah.
What's up? Sure, yeah, let's open this. Let's open the chips.